Right, let's bring in Special Advisor on Strategic Communications to the National Security Advisor, Zakari Mijinyawa, for more on this. Thank you. It's good to have you on Newsnight. It would be nice if you can elaborate some of the key points and recommendations, actually, that were made at this counterterrorism meeting. Let's start with President Tinubu's call for the establishment of a regional counter-terrorism center. There seems to be a sense of urgency. How soon is this likely to be? And the issue of intelligence was also underscored. That means, you know, intel between the security agencies needs to be beefed up. That interagency, you know, communication, you know, needs to be beefed up. Talk to us about that.
So thank you very much for having me this night. Also, thank you for your team that was on ground to have given this the widest coverage. Just like it was mentioned, it is a whole of government approach, and indeed the media and civil society are key partners in the work against terrorism. So I open by thanking you. First and foremost, one of the key highlights from Mr. President's speech indeed is strengthening regional collaboration. And Mr. President went further to actually look into the possibility of a regional counterterrorism center. So what you must underpin is that this whole initiative is a review of a narrative around the world, recognizing that Africa, and indeed Nigeria, has got the knowledge and the capability to point to a future that is better in the world of counterterrorism. And that is why the narrative here is even called the Abuja process. And all these processes will lead into the next discussions in the UN General Assembly of the Summit of the Future. And this is a conglomeration of efforts to put together resources. So Mr. President is already beginning to set the agenda. You would realize that the Sahel has suffered greatly, especially in 2022, where we saw terrorism rise by about 22%. This is worrying, and these groups continue to disrupt governance and economies across the Sahel. To an extent, we believe that some of these terrorist groups who disrupt systems are weakening our governance structures and also contributing to the changes we have seen between 2020 and 2023 of unconstitutional changes in government. Right. So there is this realization that we need regional strengthening, and that is one of the key themes of this program. Indeed, we have had mechanisms for intelligence sharing, like the RIFU and other initiatives. But given recent occurrences and challenges, definitely these systems have weakened. So today we have about 3 presidents with more than 32 entities from Africa, including our partners, EU represented, about 27 countries of the EU represented. And then the UNOCT, which following the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, the UNOCT was created to specifically support member states in building their capacity. And in the last resolution that African member states should be supported. So indeed, this is key. And now we have shown the capacity. And since the advent of terrorism from Boko Haram, this is the very first international conference that is happening in Nigeria. Okay, and this is not New York, this is in Abuja. So this is a huge statement and a change in narrative.
Let me come in here, Zakari. I think you've painted a picture, a good thing. You're talking about OCT. And looking at what's been happening around the Maghreb and the Sahel, it tells a picture. If the terrorists are so united, having their networks across these African countries, it behooves these countries to come together and see how they can fight them off. So ultimately, how is this conversation amongst these African leaders, at least we have about 3 represented physically here on the day, to set up its own continental OCT to push back and fight off to the extent that these bad guys within our continents actually, you know, defeated, if anything like that?
So it's important to appreciate that these groups are more united by ideology, which is the misinterpretation of religion. They try to misinterpret and hijack cultural and religious narratives to cause havoc, all seeking power. Now, what the presidents have made clear in all speeches is that trust is important. That came out strongly today, that we are brothers, we share a common past, and we will share a common future. So Africa must come together. Secondly, all initiatives must be African-owned and African-led. And this is the space also that the United Nations is opening up to see the capabilities that have been built over the last 10, 15 years. For example, the great work that has been done in Nigeria in terms of criminal justice approaches, and in Kenya, and in Ghana. So there is this recognition that there is capacity that has been built. So now it is the time to build the trust, come together, and by tomorrow, when we have the second session, we expect that the last session will deal on capacity building. And this is where we will be discussing about resource mobilization. The Deputy Secretary General identified this key element in the interview about resource mobilization. And the world is waiting to see, ready to support us. So both Mr. President and the NSA have indicated the desire to work together and to partner and to deal with this threat. And definitely, as we have seen, that Nigeria has been very clear in its determination to eliminate all forms of terrorism. If there is one thing that has united Nigeria, for example, is the unity against terrorism and its ideology.
Right. One other issue that was raised, though, by the United Nations, very important point raised by the UN there, that, look, there's a need for social inclusion and governance, to close governance gaps that have, of course, led to the surge in terrorism and banditry in the region. To what extent was that point stressed, and what kind of reaction, what kind of response do we expect, not just from the Nigerian government, but from the regional governments?
Yeah, so if you look at the statement, and I'm sure it will be highlighted in the concluding remarks tomorrow, but all statements went back to the UN counterterrorism strategy, where conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism were identified. And some of this is social exclusion, prolonged or resolved conflicts, issues of youth unemployment, even upward mobility. So President identified that Africa has a youth population, there's need to create jobs, and that gender balance is key, and that we need to open up our democracy and also economies. So this is highlighted and specifically identified as some of the challenges that lead to, border insecurity, terrorism financing. So there is a unanimity of purpose that governance must be reformed, that security sector reform is key, that human rights and the rule of law are integral to our counterterrorism approaches. And this mirrors the Terrorism Prevention Act and also Nigeria's counterterrorism strategy, that we must at all times embed and mainstream measures that are both social, economic, political, and even community. And that is why today we had about 20 civil society organizations who are participating in this program.
And you spoke of shared past and expected shared future, which is very important here. And you recall that through the president, through the office of the NSA and some other leaders, actually fixed that dislocation between Nigeria and even Niger, which was very key in fighting some of these bad guys. I think. Now, let's see how we can build on some of these conversations you just highlighted, because they latch on to religion, they latch on to culture, that are similar along that stretch. So border security in focus. Without delving into some of the key plans that are not to be touched, what's the talk like between these countries now that the fractured relationships have been mended?
There continues to be a commitment to continue to talk and continue to engage at both political and operational level. I assure you that notwithstanding the recent happenings, all actors, all members realize the need for commonality of purpose. And in the formulation of this meeting, that gap was identified to assess to what extent would recent happenings affect ongoing partnerships. And these gaps are being discussed and are being closed. So we are hopeful that ongoing operational intelligence sharing may not necessarily be adversely affected by these recent occurrences.
And when you say recent occurrences, sorry to butt in, I mean, what particular occurrences are you referring to? So
I was mentioning from 2020 to 2023,
okay, great.
We have had a lot of unconstitutional changes of government.
Absolutely. Needed to be very clear on that. Before we let you go, the NSA, the National Security Advisor, made a statement there and took a lot of people by surprise when he said there hasn't been any terrorist attacks on Nigeria. I mean, there have been mass kidnappings in schools and what have you. Boko Haram attacking markets in Zamfara, in Sokoto in recent times. What do you call that if it's not terrorism attacks or terrorist attacks?
Yeah, so for those in the field of CT would quickly understand what the NSA mean. And not to bother you with too much definition, but if you refer to the Terrorism Prevention Act, it actually defines what terrorism is. In every criminal act, there is the mens rea and the actus reus. So it has to be either religious, political, and within our jurisprudence, we have a definition of terrorism. So you must separate this from, say, organized crime. Somebody who picks you up, not because of your religion, but because of economic reasons. That's different. That element, that radicalized element, to deny you freedoms because of who you are, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Ansaru. So there is a second layer of definition again. And this second layer is what you constitute as insurgency and counterinsurgency, and also terrorism and counterterrorism. Of course, our armed forces are doing great work in the Northeast. These are ongoing insurgency operations in our forests and in the bush. Maybe they throw an IED, they try to shoot. But when you say terrorism, it has to be well organized with that purpose. How did you feel when the train was attacked? There was fear infused into you. The populace was in shock. 9/11 attack.
Right.
So when you take Boko Haram, ISWAP, and Ansaru, they have a specific political, religious, misinterpreted context. But if you go and take maybe some form of banditry, and they are purely economical, and ransom induced, it's just economic. It's just like any other crime. So when the NSA mentioned terrorism in that context, this is the point you make. And if you look at it, you may have skirmishes, but to have an organized terrorist group attack like Kuje,
let's not stretch it.
Like
let's not stretch it.
I can open the laws for you.
Let me buy it on your language.
Okay.
The mens rea for tomorrow, the intention for tomorrow. The intention, the mens rea for tomorrow. So what's the outlook like tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, the program for tomorrow, yes.
Okay. Tomorrow, today, the first session after the opening dealt with the landscape, looking at the whole Sahel and Africa and redefining the threat itself. The second session today dealt with lessons learned across the world on preventing and countering terrorism. Tomorrow in the morning, we will now be talking about regional capacity and institutional building.
Fantastic.
And we'll be closing by a session focused on mobilization of resources and identifying capacity building needs.
Zakari will be with
Please
you
come back
on the day. Zakari Mijinyawa, many thanks for speaking with us tonight on News.